Again, a very warm welcome from my side to the second pre-webinar of the Conference of the Europe of the Future. The pre-Siena Conference week is here, and today we will talk about global trade and globalism. And the provocative question of today will be, are we facing reverse globalism? Before I introduce the participants of tonight's discussions, I will hand over to Francesco Grillo, the director of Vision think tank, who invented not only the conference, but also the webinar series. Welcome, Francesco. The floor is yours.
Thanks a lot, Alexandra. You have been with us basically since the very beginning, the first conference in Taormina, if I'm not wrong, very much between the lockdowns, no? During the COVID period. And I myself, I'm surprised that we are getting to the 6th conference this year. I do have two PowerPoint slides, which I'm fighting with, but I can probably summarize the number one, the distinctiveness of the Siena Conference, which is probably the reason why we are getting to the 6th edition. And number two, a little bit the process through which we wanna transform the work that some of the problem-solving groups have already started into a final paper that will be discussed with the European institution and possibly outreach the general public. So basically, as far as the conference, I would say that, well, it is not certainly an academic conference. Let me tell you that, because most of us, or at least I suppose Maarten, Julius, Ignacio, also myself, are rather used to these sort of gatherings. It is what we call a platform for problem solving. So the real distinctiveness is the final goal, to produce ideas that go beyond the analysis and the lamentation of how complex is the world. And we try to do that by putting together academia in an interdisciplinary way, with media. Alexandra is from media very much, business and policymakers. Coming, as far as the Siena Conference is concerned, from all major EU countries, but also beyond EU. We have Maarten, who lives in Geneva, but we will also have probably even tonight Yan Dong, who is Chinese. Deepak could not join, he's Indian, so it's EU and beyond. The process, we have a position paper that, as far as the trade is concerned, has been produced by Maarten and has been circulated already by Maarten. The webinar tonight is meant for the participants, to the problem-solving group, to familiarize with the objectives of the problem of the group, and also with the paper, but also to give a feedback to Maarten. They will very much now start introducing his arguments, his very initial problem setting, let's say. This will be transformed into a slightly different version on the basis of the feedback tonight. That will be the paper that will be discussed into the physical meeting on Thursday in Siena. And most likely Julius, together with the chair of the group and the discussant and the other student who is not here today, will transform this thing again into some ideas that can act as a trigger to overcome the gridlocks, that are paralyzing for instance, this idea of reforming the WTO and more in general the world trade order, with the EU getting a leadership of it. Having said that, I hope it's more or less clear. Let me give you back the floor to you, Alexandra, so that we can go to Maarten. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Francesco. And yeah, thank you to introducing me, which I forgot. I'm an independent researcher, journalist, author, and lecturer. And I'm very excited about having been part of the vision effort, because I'm also engaged with constructive journalism on the board of Constructive Institute. And constructive means really striving for solutions. And this is what this conference is all about. And yeah, we have 3 esteemed speakers here tonight, and I hand over the floor immediately. And also we are in exciting times here, with like trade barriers being erected and revoked every day almost. This week has not that much has happened yet, but we'll learn more. And I'll hand over the floor first to Maarten Smeets, Senior Associate at the Clingendael Academy. Maybe you can say a few words to yourself, Maarten, and yeah, and you give your introduction. The floor is yours, Maarten.
Alexandra. And yeah, I did send around my bio, so you have a better idea. I don't know, Alexandra, did you get my bio as well?
I might have gotten it like.
Because but anyway, a few words about myself. I used to work until not very long ago at the WTO. And in that regard, I think I also met Ignacio a couple of times, and we have been working on the same issues basically. But so there I was leading the WTO Chairs program that I co-created, which links actually universities around the world. So I'm working with many universities. So when you look at my bio, you may be a bit surprised to see the type of universities I work with, because many of them are in China and Vietnam and all over the world. But if you look at my bio, you'll understand the context in what had happened. And I was also leading there the technical cooperation and training activities worldwide for the WTO. So basically that's my background. And when I left the WTO, I joined some various think tanks, including, well, the Clingendael Academy I've been working with for a while, also the World Trade Institute that I'm formally linked with, and probably I'll leave it at that. I'm doing a lot of work. Maybe that's interesting to know. I work a lot with the G20 in the context of the T20, the think tank 20. So we are actively involved in trying to give policy recommendations to the leaders of the G20. And coincidentally, the meeting of the T20 takes place at the exact very same dates as the conference in Siena. So I had to make a choice. And as I had committed to Francesco already a long time ago, and it's my big pleasure, actually, it's not a sacrifice, so don't get me wrong. It's my big pleasure to be part of this event and to come to Siena. So I admit that I got a little bit confused by the title of tonight, Are We Facing Reverse Globalism? I had understood that I had to present my paper on the way, I intend to present it next week, which is on reinventing globalization. I mean, the themes are quite similar in a way, so I don't think there's any conflict. But what I did is I circulated this morning my draft paper, and I plan to say a few words of that. Now, let me also check, Alexandra, did you get my paper?
Yes, I did.
Okay, so if everybody got my paper, I believe, then yes, I see hands up. So I just give you the gist of the idea, and there's no point reading out the paper if you have read it. But the idea is quite simple. So I think globalization needs to be rethought of, reconsidered. Are we in a reverse globalization? I'm not sure that's the right way to say it. Globalization has been damaged, I can say, because it has left out a number of people. Actually, about 10 years ago, I did my PhD on globalization. And of course, until 10 years ago, you could write all these beautiful and positive things about globalization that you can't write anymore today. So maybe I should do a second thesis to write the opposite I was writing 10 years ago. Might be an interesting topic to address. Anyway, so what we see is actually the world is in turmoil. We have a big chaos. We have never seen that before. At least I haven't seen that in my life. And I think it's fair enough from an academic perspective to say that maybe since the beginning of last century, we haven't seen such chaotic way of dealing with trade, to the point that, just remember that about 25 years ago, the WTO was, 30 years ago, the WTO was created actually to deal with the new trade issues. And we found out not long after its creation, particularly after the launch of the Doha round, that actually the WTO was no longer fit for purpose because a number of issues happened, including digitalization of trade, e-commerce. There were many new elements coming up in the way trade was being conducted, and not the least part, of course, China came into the game, and that changed completely the trading environment, because we all know, I'm stating the obvious, 30 years ago, China economically and in terms of trade was not on the map, and today it's the #1 economy, or almost, and the #1 trader for exports, imports, and also to some extent for services. So it has radically changed the game, and we know China as a country who was exporting textiles and clothing, etc. But nobody's talking about that anymore. It's all about high tech, IT and stuff. So the nature of competition has completely changed. And also that has led countries to intervene in the market and to support their companies, their businesses, because they are vital to growth and economic development, and particularly the high-tech industry. So I think what we're seeing today, I mean, the question was raised, and it will come up again in Siena, whether the notion of comparative advantage is still a valid notion. But I mean, the discussion about that has completely changed. So today we're talking about industrial policies that we haven't heard about for a long time. In the 60s and 70s, those were classic stories to talk about. But today they have come up. We have subsidy wars, and we are all sinners. China is a big sinner, Europe is a sinner to a lesser extent, and the US is a big sinner. So we're all sinners. So what can we do about that? And it's all to take the lead, to have a competitive edge, to be stronger, and to be able to create business and create employment and enhance levels of welfare. So what has happened is those policies, and particularly since they got a new president in the United States, who has completely changed the name of the game and decided that America first means that you bring business back to the United States. And we see a very active policy in doing that. We see protectionist measures that we have never seen before. So yes, you see a kind of dismantling of the global value chains, the way we have known them for the past, let's say, 20 years or so. But bringing back industries in a forced way to the United States, but not only to the US. National winners is the name of the game, creating national winners. And how do you do that? With subsidy programs, with protectionist measures, with increasing tariffs, with export controls of critical minerals, etc., etc. They're all kind of tools that are being applied. The result is that we are witnessing an economic crisis. the WTO has been under threat. Actually, the WTO is not probably, and I can say I worked there for about 30 years, and it's very sad to see that the WTO doesn't seem to know how to cope with the situation currently. I mean, they're just wobbling on and trying to deal with the issues as they come on a day-to-day basis. But the fundamental change, I mean, the fundamental reforms that they should pursue, that they should conduct, they are not happening. And partly that's the result of the way the system operates, as it is a member-driven organization, and the members have different interests. So you don't have a director general who can at some point bang her fist on the table and say, now it's enough, I've listened to all of you, and now we're going to do this, that, or that. It doesn't work like that. So it's a very slow process. That's how it is. I'm not saying that member-driven way is right or wrong or bad, but you know, we have come to a situation where we are in a stalemate. So anyway, to make a long story short, because you have all read the paper, I have a couple of concrete proposals that I think we need to put forward. The first one is we need to rebuild trust in trade. And that is not something that you can do overnight. It's not something that you can say, okay, let's build trust, and tomorrow we have trust. No, that takes time. That is a critical element. But the key fundamental elements in the WTO have been stability, security, transparency, predictability, but also I think we should add words like sustainability, etc. So that we need a system that's relevant for today's trade. That's the second main thing, that the WTO needs to be reformed fundamentally, not just cosmetically and small things. No, it needs to be reformed fundamentally. There are a number of developments taking place in the negotiations, like on the investment facilitation for development, e-commerce, and there are certain countries that keep on resisting that, although they would be the ones to benefit from those agreements. So you cannot just stick to multilateral trade agreements. You need to accept the idea that if countries are ready to accept a plurilateral agreement, which has what we call open plurilateral agreements, so that anyone can benefit from that. I think nobody should stand in the way of doing that. So there, I mean, I won't read out the whole list because there's the services issues, there's the e-commerce, there's that all of that comes together, and we should just move on, because that's also important for the way GVCs function. Okay. Then there's the issue of coherence in policies. That's my third proposal. So we need more cooperation. Instead of fighting, we need to cooperate, see how we can work together, because we share common interest. And it's not by just locking yourself up in your own country. If you're a large country like the United States, perhaps you can do that. I'm not convinced. In China, you can do that because you have 1.5 billion consumers. So you have a huge market on your own. But what about the other smaller countries and the vulnerable economies like the African, the Asian countries and Latin American countries? So you need to have coherent policies. You need to also have sustainable industrial policies. You need to just agree on what you can do and what you cannot do. And that brings us to the subsidies agreement, which needs a major overhaul. Then the global value chain had become very vulnerable. As I say in the text, a chain is as vulnerable as the weakest element in the chain. So you need to perhaps diversify your sources. You need to get other partners involved. Maybe not have an extremely long chain, but also not just say, okay, we do everything ourselves in our own market. That doesn't work. You need to diversify, but we need to also think of how can we re-globalize in a way that's inclusive, that developing countries participate. And finally, what we're seeing happening is the breaking up of the fragmentation of the trading system in geographical blocks. And that is actually going quite fast right now, because in Asia, you see that happening. You see that happening everywhere. But my view is that, yes, perfectly fine, because they promote trade liberalization, but let's do it in a coherent fashion, in a coordinated fashion, that it complements multilateralism. I have perhaps already spoken for too long, but I think these are some of the key elements that I would like to put forward, and we can have a discussion. And all comments on the paper are welcome.
Thank you so much, Maarten, and thank you for elaborating a bit, because not everyone who's listening here to the webinar might have read your paper. Before I hand over to Julius, really, just a couple of questions. This, how do you think geopolitics and the battle for resources will affect global trade with AI and IT developments being in need of huge resources everywhere, and it seems to be that there's a heightened awareness of that. How will that affect trade and the willingness to cooperate?
Yeah, I mean, this is a big thing, as we know, and we read, is China holds most of the critical minerals, and they have an export ban. I think that was partially lifted. I mean, in the fight between the US and China, China decided, okay, no more of that for you. And then Trump, I think he pedaled back and he said, okay, let's give ourselves 90 days to figure out what is the best approach. And so China says, okay, well, okay, let's figure it out. But they are in no hurry. They are in no hurry. To release those ingredients, and we know that they are also available. Some of that is well, I think they hold about 90% of the critical minerals that we can think of, and that they are essential for the industry in the West, in Europe, in the United States. So, what will happen with that? I think that will be a determining factor.
Yeah, okay. So before we can debate later, but let's move on to Julius Niewisch. He's at Potsdam University, and he's our second introducer for today. Welcome, Julius, and maybe also you can say a few words about what you're working on, and then introduce the topic from your perspective. Thank you.
Alexandra. Actually, at the moment, I'm in Siena as well, because I'm studying in Siena for now. I've studied in Posdam and then in Paris as well. Can you hear me?
The sound is very, very bad.
Really?
I can't really hear what you.
Second.
Maybe you need to join. Yeah, second is good. Because if not, then, well, and until Julius is fixing this, Maarten, maybe I should ask you another question, because I'm curious about the effect of the pandemic also. I mean, now it seems like long ago, but at least from my perspective, the pandemic has really highlighted many vulnerabilities of that completely global system of trade, and we had shortages, for example, with pharmaceuticals everywhere. Do you think the pandemic has had an effect, or is this negligible, because what you were mostly talking about is really policies and subsidy war and political interest, and not these really this really grave event that really shook up a lot of people's understanding of global trade?
Yeah, I think the pandemic has triggered this idea that we should have more participants in the global value chain, and you cannot just monopolize that. Particularly the developing countries, the African countries, they were in dire need of many of the products that they didn't have. So what has happened actually, and there was an initiative from the Director General of the WTO, Ngozi, to make sure that some of those products are being made available or even being produced in Africa itself, that you forget about the patents, that they can have access to production capacities without necessarily having to pay for the patents. So I think it has created a new mindset, awareness of making sure that we should rethink the notion of globalization and also, me first approach to. Well, that's a short answer to a complex question, but that's definitely, I'm not sure I satisfy you with my answer, but I think it has triggered the mindset and the thinking about how actually trade should be conducted in a way that everybody can benefit from that.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And now, Julius, we are curious to learn from you, and hopefully your sound works now.
I've been just getting my headphones. Can you hear me better now?
Yeah, it's
Wonderful.
better.
All right, then that's where. Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. First of all, I'm at Siena University actually at the moment because I'm studying here. But I studied in Potsdam and in Paris, French and German law before, then international relations in Krakow and in Siena. So yes, I'm one of the student participants, so I don't hold as much knowledge maybe about the intricacies of the WTO system as Maarten does. And so I've decided for this introduction to unfold the topic and especially the question that Maarten brought up in his paper, which was, can an export-oriented model still sustain Europe's prosperity in an increasingly fragmented world? So in other words, is the liberal economic order that we've backed since World War II, is it still fitting to this world for us Europeans? And so I've come up with this idea of saying, well, the question is actually quite well phrased because we don't ask necessarily how do we save our export-oriented model, but rather do we actually wish to save it? Now you will find in me somebody who is very much in favor of this liberal model, but I think it's important to start from the basics behind it. Because we can also decide it's a possibility that is being discussed in Europe, and a lot of especially far-right parties might bring it up to say, no, we do prefer protectionist, nationalist models, and we do not want to uphold the liberal economic model because it simply doesn't fit in this world anymore. But if we decide to fight for this model, I think there are certain trade-offs that will have to be made because in the end, deciding to opt for free trade means we accept that there is interdependency with other countries, that there is interdependency, for example, with China, as we just heard, because we rely on these resources to maintain our industries in Europe, and we also accept the division of labor. We accept simply that we're part of a world that we can't, like of a deal, of a trade-off that we can't get out. So that is something that needs to be communicated, that there is this dependency that comes with the system. And then on the other hand, if we decide against the system, there's another question we have to ask. Do we want to sustain the liberal model within Europe? Because this is what Europe has been built on, or do we just realize for this coming time, for this next age, which is an age of controversy, an age of geopolitical and economic conflict, aren't other systems maybe better off, other systems that work more like the state capitalism that China uses? Isn't that the better system for that age? Now, I'm not a friend of this idea, but I think it's a question that should be asked and that should be maybe also answered fervently, that it isn't the case, but it still needs to be justified. But to get back to the idea, yes, we want to fight for this rule-based free trade order. We want to fight for, in the end, the WTO system, even though it gets a strong reform because we observe the gridlock that just has been happening for the last 10 to 15 years. Then we have another question, or other questions, another trade-off, which is, are we willing to sacrifice, for example, our environmental standards, values, human rights, and so on, just because other partners might not agree with us and might say, well, if you want to imprint your vision on trade with your values, basically, well, then we don't want to trade with you. That might happen to us as well. So how much leverage do we have? And then, well, if we don't get our values, our standards, and so on in the system, do we decide to back out after all because it just doesn't work for us, for example? So that's also one of these fundamental questions. And then another one would be, can we do it without the United States? Donald Trump says, okay, we do not believe in the system anymore. And so as Europeans, we might say, well, okay, we do it ourselves. But last time we tried to imprint the world with our system, it didn't end too well, basically, because we've tried it for 500 years and it ended in colonialism, for example. So I'm not saying this has to happen again, but it's something we have to be aware of, obviously, that this is a tendency that might happen. So my point is, in the end, I believe very much that this system can be salvaged and that we can find an agreement, but we will need to deal with these trade-offs. We'll need to answer these questions. We'll also need to accept maybe that well, we cannot do things like we did over the last 70 years, which means we dictate the rules the others have to follow. But we might have to accept that, okay, other countries, other partners from European perspective might not like it the way we do it and might not wish to cooperate in the way we want them to cooperate. And so the big question is, are we ready to accept this, or do we, well, follow the big global trend? Do we follow the Trumps of the world and say, okay, we will then do the same, we protect ourselves, Europe first?
Yeah, thanks a lot. And since this is the conference for the Europe of the future, and also the name of this think tank is Vision, maybe it's a bit too much to ask, but what would your vision be for the European role in this? Do you have any, or is it more what you just said is like we need to ask the right questions and then we need to position ourselves?
I mean, thanks for the question. I'm young. I grew up because I'm 24. I grew up in a Europe that was already solidified. I grew up in reunited Germany, and so for me, basically unity, bringing countries together, open borders. The Berlin Wall was something that I never lived through, for example. It's something that my parents tell me about, but that's it. And then I can go to any country within the European Union. I have a passport with which I can travel. So this is the open world that I've grown up with. And so that seems to be, let's say, the logical model for me. And I think it's something that we'd be very proud of if Europe actually had the strength to fight for this. But I can see, obviously, because it's so apparent that Europe doesn't necessarily have the institutional arrangement setting that is necessary for it. So what I would ask politicians in the end, and like the generation that is at this moment governing the European Union in my country, is, well, to fight for this, to build this vision in which Europe becomes this first actor among equals, maybe as well, to fight for this world that I cherish very much because I've been benefiting from it for a while, and not just to give up because there are, well, let's say bullies like Donald Trump, for example, or like Vladimir Putin, or maybe also Xi Jinping, even though that's maybe a different story, that would like to dismantle it. So I think Europe should have the strength, and I'm also personally ready to, let's say, give, like to accept that means that for my own country, that means maybe less sovereignty in Berlin and more sovereignty, well, shared sovereignty in Brussels or wherever.
Yeah, thanks a lot. And this might be a lot to have asked from you. And I'm aware that you're quite young, but first of all, you know, this is your generation is the future. You have to solve all these problems. And sometimes it's also good to have a vision and not being held back by common assumptions and patterns. And so forgive me for asking such a bold question. I'll hand over to Ignacio now. Ignacio Garcia, he's a fellow with Bruegel think tank and retired from the European Commission. Is that right? Where you worked on trade. So and maybe you could also say a few words about your roles now and what you're working on and what your connection to the conference is, what you want to present.
Yes, no, thanks a lot, Alexandra. And let me just briefly say, yes, I'm currently working for the Bruegel think tank, and I have been writing the papers on trade policy, the Trump tariffs, the prospects of reform of the WTO. But when I could argue that I was there present in the creation, because I joined the commission at the time when the WTO was going to be created, the negotiations of the Uruguay round. And now I have been actually leading the WTO team until I retired last year. So this is something which is quite close to my heart. And the first comment which I want to make is a little bit along the lines of what Maarten said. The kind of disruption that we are currently witnessing in the trading system is something which has never really been witnessed before. It is true that there were also some moments of big turbulence, for instance, in the 18th, but still you have the United States who was interested in building up a rule-based trading system. Even it was ready to take disruptive action. It was with the objective of building up a more developed rule-based system. And now one needs to accept that the United States is applying disruptive action and seems to have no interest whatsoever in a rule-based trading system. So this is a really very profound disruption. I think it really raises a rather fundamental question, which is it still possible to imagine a multilateral rule-based institution that has both United States and China, and that is rule-based? I think that's a rather fundamental, almost existential question, which is actually facing the WTO. I mean, I think that it is in the European interest to do whatever it is that we can to ensure that we still have a system which is rule-based, but it's going to be quite a challenge. It's going to require having a real capacity of leadership, and leadership is costly. I mean, I think that Julius was absolutely right. If you really want to act as a leader, if you want to bring countries together, create a coalition of countries that want to move in the direction of a restructured rule-based trading system, you need to be able to make compromises. You need, for instance, to be able to accept that one of the issues that will have to be done is agricultural reform. You need to be able to accept that you need to see how to cooperate with others when it comes to responding to global environmental challenges, that you cannot just simply do it on a pure autonomous basis. And all of those issues are hard, and issues which are going to require a capacity of leadership, which is difficult to undertake at the moment, which is also quite challenging for Europe, both in economic and political terms. So I think that, in my view, is a real challenge ahead of us. I have to say that unfortunately I have not been able to read Maarten's paper, but hearing his presentation, it seems to me that we are probably quite like-minded in terms of the things that need to be done to restructure the global trading system. You need to work on the basis that the rules as they currently are not really responding to some of the critical challenges of today. There are important gaps in the rule book on international trade, and quite frankly, it's not going to be possible to fill those gaps through multilateral agreements. The membership is too diverse to expect that can happen through multilateral agreements. You need to find some way of advancing through open plurilateral agreements. But the issues that will need to be tackled in those open plurilateral agreements are quite difficult. I mean, to give you 3 examples, for me, there are 3 fundamental questions where you need to develop cooperative rule-based responses. One is the whole question about how to ensure a level playing field despite the big differences between the Chinese economic system and that of market-based economies. How do you ensure that you can maintain the level playing field? And that implies talking about subsidies, talking about the state-owned enterprises. And at the end of the day, you need to be able to see if it's possible to agree on those issues both with China and the United States. It looks at this point in time quite idealistic to think about that perspective, but at the end of the day, unless you go in that direction, you are not going to have a system which is stable. You need to look into rules on digital trade, which is the most important part of the economy, and which at this point in time is not really being subject to any framework of international rules. And you need to see how to work cooperatively to decarbonize those sectors which are trade intensive. And that, again, it's a big challenge to try to build up the plurilateral coalitions to do that. And at the end of the day, if you want to find some way of integrating all these things into a reform WTO, you would need to fundamentally change the structure of the WTO agreement, because you would need to make it easy for the plurilateral agreements to be integrated into the WTO. And at this point in time, even some very simple agreements, like the one that Maarten mentioned on investment facilitation, which is quite frankly a very, very soft agreement with a very large participation, cannot be integrated in the WTO because of the rule of consensus. You would really need to have a hard discussion to see whether it is still possible to have a binding dispute settlement system despite the tensions which are currently governing the relationship between the United States and China. And in my view, the only way that you will be able to have again a functioning dispute settlement system would require some recognition that there has to be more policy space to take action for economic security purpose and to take action to defend the level playing field. And then at the end of the day, you will also need to look into the whole balance of commitments, which currently does not really represent the reality of the world today. So all of this is very difficult, and it's not going to happen in the short term, which also raises the issue about what it is that the European Union can do in the meantime, to what extent it can actually build up coalitions of countries as inclusive as possible, which are interested in continue to abide by the rules, but who also recognize that the rules need fundamental reform. And that, I think, is a question about how to try to have the European Union building up this coalition. So all in all, I mean, I I'm sorry I couldn't read the paper, Maarten, so if you could actually send it to me, because I think I have not actually received it, and then happy to send some feedback, but my sense is that I would probably agree with a lot of what you say in the paper.
Thank you. I just sent it to your Gmail, actually, so you will have it. And I'm glad to have listened to your points, but I'll give the floor to Alexandra. She is the chair. Sorry, Alexandra.
Yeah, no problem at all. I'm happy for you to discuss also. And I mean that seems to be core what you just said, Ignacio. Like, you know, what can we as Europeans or the European Union also do in between, because we have only only a limited leverage with the global organizations, but as EU, like building coalitions, that's what I just understood, is really a step forward, and also finding building coalitions also around the European values. Francesco, you want to jump in here?
Yeah, let me jump in just to compliment Maarten, to reiterate that we do have the paper in the group. So Ignacio, you should be fine, and to very much support Julius, because we need some ideas, some bold ideas. Two things. Number one, in terms of what we would ideally would like to have from this discussion, not tonight, but at the end of the Siena problem solving group, so that Maarten can be absolutely happy that he didn't go to the T20 in Cape Town or whatever it is, and he came to Siena. We need not a overall strategy to redo the governance of the world trade system, but really a couple of ideas that can act as triggers to unlock the gridlocks, because this is the problem of all the complex problems. You know, it's not just the world trade system. It's everything. You know, it's the United Nations. It's COP. It's the EU. In fact, we need to find a trigger, couple of ideas to force the change. No, this is what we would really need to have, Julius. Otherwise, we are always having this huge holistic vision. We are vision, and then we do not really make progress. On the question of trade, if I can suggest on this specific thing one name of the game, let's say, which may probably help to boil down to a couple of ideas. Here we have an organization, the WTO, which, by the way, is in Geneva, where Maarten lives, which is completely blocked, paralyzed. By the way, it is paralyzed thanks to not only Donald Trump, but also Joe Biden, because Trump basically refused to nominate, well, Maarten, you know the story better than I do. The United States blocked the nomination of the judge of the appeal body, basically, and Biden confirmed the no choice. So it's completely paralyzed because of the United States. However, I would argue that here it's not just a question of deblocking, defrosting the appeal body, no, of the World Trade Organization, but also about probably think of a broadening of the mission of this animal called the WTO. Because Maarten, you and you, Ignacio, you are the real experts, not me, and probably nor Julius. But WTO was basically conceived to have a sort of arbiter of disputes among countries and to apply some rules. Here, probably today, we also have another not smaller question, which is about the vulnerability of value chain, that Maarten mentioned a few times, and also Alexandra. We have a system where we literally took the advice of David Ricardo, and we made one country to produce only cloth, and another country only produce wine. The problem is that if those two countries go into war, or simply there is a problem with the shipping of the wine and the clothes, you end up with the British only have clothes for themselves and not being able to go to get drunk, and the Portuguese only to have wine and to completely go banana without clothes, which is chaos, So we probably need a system which is meant to fight this hyper concentration, hyper specialization, which can turn to be extremely dangerous for the entire system. So, and let's have some ideas on how this thing can be done.
Can I react to that?
Okay.
Yeah, of course.
Sure. First, and then Ignacio, who's also raising his hand.
Sorry, Ignacio. Well, first, Ignacio, I sent you the paper to your Gmail, so you should have it by now. And happy to get any comments, either in what format soever anyone likes to submit, so we can be inclusive. I think there are a couple of points in reaction to what. Well, I'm very happy with what the points Ignacio made, which I think we are very much in sync. But I think there are a couple of issues on DSU. Solving the appellate body issue will not solve the WTO, will not solve it to WTO. In fact, there are some positive sides on the fact that the appellate body has been killed, if I can put it like that, in the sense that there's more bilateral consultation and there are more bilateral solutions that are being found than any time before. And that is the original idea of the dispute settlement. The idea was not to go through the panels and then automatically go to the appellate body, but to sort out the issues. So in fact, the appellate body is just like in a normal national system. The idea is to only go to the appeals board or the appellate body if you believe that the judges have erred in their reasoning. So the positive side is that actually many panels have come to, or many issues have been solved in a positive way, including through the good offices of the Director General. So that is one side. So solving the appellate body issue doesn't mean you have solved the WTO issues. That goes much deeper. So that's one. The second thing is the issue of leadership. I think we should focus a little bit on that. There are no leaders anymore. So as one of the DDGs in the past would say, like it's a member-driven organization, but who is really driving? There are no drivers anymore. In the past, it was the EU and it was the US. And because they had key interest in opening markets bilaterally and elsewhere. And but in negotiations, and Ignacio knows all of this far better than I do, but in negotiations, when you take a leadership role, when you take an initiative, it means that you want to ask for something and in return you have to give something. So why then take a leadership role in doing that? It doesn't mean that the countries, and including the EU, are not taking initiatives. I think certainly the EU is very constructive and positive in its way it's approaching the issues and trying to solve issues, but there are no clear leaders. When you go to a ministerial conference, there's no clear leader saying, now this needs to be done, that needs to be solved. So that is another issue. Let me leave it at that for the time being, but those are two key points in my view.
Okay, Maarten, and Ignacio, your comment here or question?
No, actually, I was really prompted to intervene by this suggestion by Francesco that what we are supposed to come out at the end of this discussion is with 2 or 3 ideas which are new and that give some sense of direction about the reform or restructuring of the global trading system. Now, my suggestion is that we do not become too much focused on the institutional questions. I mean, you can always debate what changes you might need to do on the WTO agreement, how to bring back a functioning dispute settlement system. But at the end of the day, these are just, if you want, the systems, the symptoms. I think where we might be able to provide more of an intellectual stimulus is if you actually look into the fundamental contradictions, which are the fundamental tensions, which are actually preventing the system from working the way that it should work. And there, I think you need to be looking essentially into 2 big issues. One is really the interface between China and not only the United States. I think it is with China and the rest of the world, because it's the fundamental question about when you have an economy with such a strong role of the state, to what extent you can still maintain something which is being perceived as being the level playing field. Some people would argue it's impossible. There's simply no way that you can actually reconcile the reality of China with the core principles of the WTO, like MFN, like rule-based. I totally disagree with that. But if you want to show that it is possible to find a rule-based solution that can still accommodate the difference in the economic systems, then you need to give some sense about in which direction that those contradictions can be resolved. And in a way connected to this is also the whole economic security issue that I think you raised, Francesco, this situation about very significant dependencies that have been generated, which can be weaponized. And again, to what extent you can actually find ways of de-risking those dependencies without meaning that you are abandoning any pretense of maintaining rule-based trade. I think that is, for me, some of the core problem that you would need to find a solution if you are going to hope to have in the future a system where both the United States and China can be there. And the other one affects perhaps a little bit more directly the European Union, because of course people are very upset with all the tariff policies coming from the United States. But if you actually talk with some countries in the global south, they're also quite upset about what they see as being the tendency by the European Union to take unilateral action to regulate issues that go way beyond its jurisdiction. And again, I think it's legitimate. I mean, I'm a big believer in the legitimacy of CBAN, in the legitimacy of the deforestation regulation, because the objectives which are being pursued are legitimate ones. But you need to be able to find some way of saying you can tackle also those issues in a more cooperative manner with other countries, particularly countries in the global south. And again, I think this is also the other type of challenge that you would need to be able to respond to if you actually want particularly you want to build a coalition for WTO reform, because then you are going to have to interact with countries like Brazil, like South Africa, like India. And at the end of the day, if you want to interact with them, you also need to be able to be responsive to what their concerns are. And this can be done, by the way, without sacrificing our high standards, our high values, but it requires some willingness to be engaged much more in diplomacy, in negotiations, rather than pretending that you can just simply legislate autonomously and the rest of the world is going to follow you because of the Brussels effect, which is not really working so much these days.
Thank you so much, Ignacio. We need a lot more diplomacy and collaboration. This is what I gather from here. Are there any more questions? Because it's been a long day. If not, I would get ready to conclude here. Is there anyone else who want to jump in? That doesn't seem to be the case. Yeah, then let me thank you really for just raising these important questions and these important points. And I'm very much looking forward to continuing the conversation in Siena, directly there with so many more people from different regions of the world included. And for everyone else who's listening in, you might be interested in joining the next webinar tomorrow. It will also be at 6, and it will be a webinar on the next EU budget. And Marco Bucci from European University Institute will present a paper, and we will have lots of competence and knowledge in the room again to discuss it. So thank you so much, everyone who was listening, and in particular, big thanks to Maarten, Ignacio, and Julius, and of course, as ever, to Francesco for setting this up. Thanks a lot and have a good evening.